Hello there, my name's Jude Pullen and I'm a creative technologist and prototyping expert. And it's with great pleasure today that I'd like to introduce to you the ProtoLabs Inspire On series. And what I'm going to be talking about today is designing in sustainability. So, speaking as a designer, engineer, and a general all round enthusiast of new ideas, I'm really excited to present this event with fellow innovators around the world. And so, in many ways, it's been a rare opportunity to actually be quite close to the end user in this case, and actually be thinking from the perspective of what would you, the audience of designers, engineers, or indeed people in marketing or sales, working with designers, what would you like to know to help you to positively impact the products, the services you make through better design in sustainability? So let's take a look at what the program is looking like. So as you can see here, we basically got this incredible selection of 21 speakers, and it's running over 6 weeks. And it truly is from all around the world. So the silver lining in lockdown here is we haven't been bound by geography, and it's truly a global experience. And so I'm going to explain more about this format later, but to give you some highlights, we broke it down into ways of initially trying to get people inspired so that it lives in the hearts and minds, not just of you, the viewer, but also the people who you work with. And of course, the hackathon element of it, of that we're wanting to give people tools and techniques used by professionals, but also sort of giving a primer so that you can get going easily and effectively within this. Now, having said that, it's all very well and good having these great ideas, but sometimes it's not about just being right. It's about making it happening and running that gauntlet of the real world. And so we've got speakers talking about how to sort of make it happen in the real world against the odds, against setbacks like commercial constraints and all these sorts of things. So I think this is going to be a nice thing. And as you can see from the color schemes here, we've got the yellow, green, and blue alluding to some of those, but also the orange is there for the incurably curious among you who really want their minds blown, their horizons expanded, and in many ways, even commercially speaking, how to get ahead of the pack and establish a big differential. So, on a personal note, I also wanted to sort of say that this has really been, trying to be honest about the fact that this isn't something you just turn a key and become adept at overnight. There isn't a sort of single rule, there isn't a formula or a guru who can solve these problems. And in many ways, I've always found that it's an ongoing journey that seems to get more interesting as the years go by. And even though I've had the pleasure of working for some amazing companies like Lego and Dyson, all the way through to startups like Sugru, I've really enjoyed inventing things as part of design documentaries for BBC and Channel 4. But the thing that's always become very apparent is that change is never easy. Doing something new and original is always difficult, and convincing others requires a huge amount of patience and persistence. And it's rarely about just being right and being the engineer and having all the stats and the graphs. It's never just about that, sadly. So sustainability as well, it's worth pointing out, is never really just an add-on or just a marketing campaign or a little side project. It's often a mindset that requires continual practice. Maybe much more sort of a better metaphor is, if you're learning how to paint or draw, or indeed going to the gym and exercising, it's just a continual thing. So perhaps this sounds like a little bit of a cliche, but for me, Scandinavia was unquestionably a big influence on sustainability and design for me and many other people. And I had the pleasure of studying here for a year in Norway. And it's worth pointing out there was no eco design module that you went and got 10 credits for. In many ways, there it's just seen as business as usual. There was no greenwashing. It was just considered better design to be conscious of the impact of creating a product in the first place. So one of my tutors recommended a book, and I think it's pretty fair to say it changed my life with one quote. In many ways, isn't an understatement. And so this is Victor Papanek's Design for the Real World. So the first edition is on the left, and it's on numerous reprints now on the right, and it's actually in its 50th anniversary of its publication. And so, of course, the quote that left a mark for me is, there are few professions more harmful than industrial design, but only a few. And it's worth pointing out that this is not a book about living like a monk, going off to the hills and dressing in sackcloths. It's not a lecture or sort of virtue signaling posturing. It's an extremely pragmatic and nuanced exploration of the relationship to consumer goods, but it doesn't pass the buck and essentially let designers off the hook and say you can't just blame the consumers and the legislators only. You yourself as a designer have to acknowledge that you are part of an elite group of people who aren't just highly educated but are also skilled in the art of making things addictive. So whether you do this covertly or overtly, you still make things highly desirable if you're good at what you do. So the question you have to ask yourself as you progress through your career and get through that point of thinking, can I design it? Do I know how to injection mold? Do I know how to get the packaging right? Is it, a good price, etc.? Is you start moving into this territory of, should I be designing this thing? And even if we can't all have big virtuous projects, at the same time there's still a reality that even if you are selling something which maybe is a little bit in a gray area, the question still is, can you make it better? And that's where I think the book is really an incredible philosophical handbook, and for me was like a big guiding theme throughout this talks, because it isn't just the philosophy, it's also the pragmatism about how to make it work in the real world. And you can appreciate in the title, the big words are design and real world. This is not fluff. This is about getting it done. So another time while I was at Dyson, I was grappling with these thoughts and sort of aspirations, and a mentor of mine introduced me to this quite literally a doorstepper of a book by Boothroyd and Dewhurst called Design for Manufacture and Assembly. You can see it in the bottom left there. I'll be honest with you, don't rush out and buy it if you're not an engineer, because it's very heavy going. There's lots of very detailed tolerance tables, materials considerations, assembly processes. It's great if that's what you're into, but it's not for everyone. But however, this graphic, which has been sort of updated because the original was a little grainy, really stuck with me. And as you can see here, what is so interesting is this concept around shadows. So the design is this tiny little 5% shadow, individual of cost, but it's throwing this 70% shadow of influence. And so what it's meaning is that, the provocation, you could debate whether design is actually now, this was written, I think, in 1995, designers are arguably paid a little bit more. So let's say it's 10%. And actually I've heard, the influence even quoted by some bigger research companies as being closer to 80%. However, the point isn't to get into the minutiae of the numbers. The point is the ratio between the two. It's really to say that if you are, as a designer, you are making so many fundamental changes that guide the end result of a product, you cannot dismiss your importance in making those choices early on. And indeed, when you look at the next little bundle of images along, which is all the materials in the boxes, you can appreciate most designers are probably thinking, hey, I do the material specification and the BOM and all that sort of stuff as well. And that's exactly the point, is that design is expanding all the time, to the point where most designers I know are reasonably adept in helping shape the marketing message, and indeed working with supply chain. So the provocation for me here really is that, it is that sort of superhero thing of, you have a lot of great power, influence, and credentials, and it's how you use that responsibly now that is going to be the big provocation. So another image that I thought would be helpful is that, if we take a generic product cycle here, and I wouldn't fixate on whether it's a product, a service, a physical or a digital thing. The point is, we're trying to say that from the sketchbook all the way through to the end result, it really doesn't help anyone if you just plug it in at the end, the sustainable thinking. That inevitably ends up looking like greenwashing, because you can put all the talk you like, but if you're still making terrible materials choices, the electronics are a mess, the end of life hasn't been considered, the consumables are all over the place, it doesn't really matter. So if you are a designer, or indeed someone listening to this working with designers trying to incorporate sustainable thinking sooner, be it in the materials, the methodology, or the marketing, it's much more likely to endure and run the gauntlet and have better coherence between the product and the message if you do start sooner rather than later. So Just, not to steal thunder from some of the speakers, but a story that I really loved was how this startup had basically developed this product, and let's say, it could be something akin to printers and ink. And essentially, it realized that it could have a huge amount of money that it could make from a consumable element, in this case, a bag. And it decided that it wasn't going to do that. It was going to make it reusable. So the printer and ink analogy would be, can you refill it really easily? And that would be, heretical to the conventional business case. You're leaving money on the table. What are you thinking? But it was done with sustainability in mind. And so this, of course, meant that, you've got to think of different ways to make this a viable product. And so the product, the messaging, and indeed the user experience all changed, I might add, for the better. And so this is a company that is hugely successful on this particular product and has spawned many other products within this ecosystem around the brand as well. And it's worth pointing out, this isn't an 11th hour pivot that they did. They really started at the drawing board and built it into the philosophy of the company. And that's why they're actually heading towards a B Corp status in this. So stay tuned. I'm being a little bit cryptic, but there's some incredible stories in this series. And indeed, without getting too sort of, corporate sounding, I think it is genuinely a meaningful interaction for the sponsors and hosts of this, ProtoLabs, to be operating at the prototype level, because this is the bit where so many of these decisions are made. And so I find it quite exciting that, even though you could argue the prototype is a tiny fraction of the end product in terms of its impact in the world, it's where the big decisions are made. So this is why I think it's so important and so exciting to see this partnership happening. Anyway, on with this incredible lineup of 6 weeks, 21 speakers, and 4 categories that I mentioned. I should also point out, I have been in your shoes as well. And so I worked as a technology scout for Lego for some 2.5 years, all very rock star, being flown around the world looking at cool stuff. But I can tell you in all honesty, the glamour wears off when you have to ingest some 20 or 30 keynotes over the course of a few days. It is not just mentally, but it's physically exhausting as well. And so, oddly enough, I consider this a bit of a silver lining, dare I say, of the pandemic, that us having to move this into a remote and online teaching aid has actually really played out for the better, that we haven't been constrained by geography and we truly can have speakers from all around the world. And indeed, this isn't to diminish or undermine any of the quality of the speakers here with my poor metaphors, but I sort of really see this as a bit like a chocolate box. You can really go in and there is no rule on how you go through these talks. You can pick and choose different themes. You can focus on things that matter to you today. And it might be that tomorrow you come in and dial in something else that's pertinent for you. And I've spoken to so many engineers, designers, and people in the industry of making great things. And the thing that is very obvious is that these are passionate, driven people, but they are short on time. Most people are working between 40 and 70 hours a week. And so the idea that you could just, binge what 25 hours of content is just ridiculous. And so what I love about this is that you can pace yourself, dare I say it, a little bit like chocolate, and you can have just a little bit every day as you need it, without feeling overwhelmed and overburdened and trying to achieve everything all in a couple of weeks. And so, as you can see from these 4 colors at the bottom, the thing that's hopefully rather useful is that we've sort of used this as a key to help you navigate what can seem like too much information. So, for example, if you're at the stage where you just need to get inspired, fired up your thinking, or indeed you want to help take examples to inspire your team or your leaders or your boss, then the Inspire to Change series is a really great place to kick off. And indeed, the technical tools that go with it, those are really a complement, from everything from materials to LCA calculators. And indeed, most of the people listening to this are technical people, but even if you're not, the point is, I still believe even if you are an engineer, a primer is really good to break it down simply. And it's the old Einstein thing of, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So I really hope the speakers are helping everyone along here. I know there will be. So, for example, let's just, take a random example is that you might get inspired by Joe's circular economics. You might be startled by some of James's legislated warnings. You might think, well, this is a good time now to go look at a primer on plastics from Vanessa and Helena. But it might be that you actually think, well, hold on, I could do with a bit of entrepreneurial hustle to get this, kick-started and off the ground, in which case you, Andy, and Sinead might give some great advice of how you could go about that. Now, time may pass and you might revisit the fact that you have watched Simon's LCA primer. Some of it went over your head, but now suddenly it all comes into focus. And so you combine this with methods from the Lafari studio. This is Daniel and Chris. And, whilst not forgetting to maybe sort of think, hold on a minute, the packaging's important. How do I take that to another level with Dane's talk as well? It could be that you do all this and still, it could be 6 months or a year later, and you actually realize, right, I'm going to go back and take a look of that recording from Sophie, because actually I realized some of the deeper philosophical points that she was making could help me understand how to move the company's strategic agenda forward significantly. So the beauty of these things being, jump in, enjoy them live, engage, but also this is a permanent resource you can come back to. So let's assume that you're making progress, you're firing on all cylinders, it's all great. The Go Faster series is about acknowledging the fact that you are going to come across obstacles. You are going to hit budget cuts, people are going to disagree with you, they'll have other priorities, there'll be politics, all these obstacles. This is just the real world, as Victor Papanek would have said. And so how do you win against the odds? And so these are great stories from people about how they can share their tips and tricks and battle stories. And I think this is often the crux of whether a product is or isn't going to survive. It isn't just about whether it's a good idea. It's about, can it run the gauntlet of these realities in the world that we live in? And so commercially and ethically, is this a good idea? And of course, as you can see, you're in good company here from the likes of IDEO, Futerra, operating at very senior corporate experiences, all the way through to the fleet of foot of startups from Erica, Andrew, and Sophia here. So whatever the size of your organization, I would also not just assume that if you're a startup, watch the startup, definitely learn at different levels of scale. It all cross-pollinates, and it's very exciting to see it come together. Now, with that said, there might be some of you who are hungry for more and this just isn't enough. And so the Thinking Big series is exactly what it sounds like. I have to say, Sunil has completely reshaped my perception on consumer pressure on retail innovation. Tom is going to delve into challenging public opinion and how this is obviously a dark art of narrative, facts, and emotions. And I would also say that Andy is going to, frankly, has completely flipped my perspective on how the code within our devices and platforms needs to be completely rethought if we're going to survive the next 10, 20, 30 years. Alex is also going to get into how we create cultures of innovation, not just, one-off products or side hustles. And Nicola, I feel it's an important thing to still keep pressing this agenda of what is our relationship with renewable energy, and in particular solar. And Sam is going to do something kind of off-piste, which I haven't seen, and is going to be pretty exciting as well. It's a unique experience. It's immersive, to say the least, and it helps us engage with something that I think is a really exciting problem, an issue, which is our innate tolerance for uncertainty. I mean, half of the preamble that I've just given you is about how do you have the courage to go forward? So why is it that as humans, we do have an aversion to risk and the unfamiliar, and not to shy away from that, not to apologize, but to embrace it and move forwards with it? So I think this is going to be something to remember. So please do browse all the program experience, and of course do share with all your friends as well. And I'd like to close on one just little reflection here, is that the entire process of curating these talks with these wonderful speakers, we've had this common goal of that we wanted to be equally provocative to shake things up a little bit, but also pragmatic to make sure that we didn't just leave you twisting in the wind, and that you could really go forward and create impact. And so I know I get personally frustrated if I watch an amazing talk, I get all excited, and then I go back to my job or I try to talk to my team, and I just realize there's this huge delta between the amazingness of the talk and my ability to actually work on it. And so how do you close that delta? And so in that response, we came up with cheat sheets. Now, working title on this, but basically the core of this is that it's 50% inspiration and 50% practical action. And so these things, you can consider them, they do serve as an appendices, as a bibliography and citation for the talks, but they're much more than that. The sort of internal message that we provoked people of is, what do you wish you could tell your 5 to 10 years younger self today? So, all that knowledge, all that wisdom, what do you wish you could distill it down and say, this is really going to help you? And so the cheat sheets, it's not meant to be an oracle. It's one side of A4, but it's a personal toolkit of sage advice, links, tools, videos, books, and more from those speakers that have really helped them get to the level of excellence that they are today. And it's incredible that they're sharing it with you as well through this. So please do sign up. These are only available. And this is an example from Erica, as you can see here. And it's really getting into the things like 5 messages on the left of distilling the talk, as you said, but then also 5 tools that you can go on away and apply right now. So basically baby steps. And then the gray section at the end is really about saying, you might be coming back in 6 months' time. How do you keep the fires burning? How do you keep making progress? So with these amazing 21 speakers, I still imagine that there'll be questions, in which case, please do participate in the live Q&A at the end of every 40-minute talk. And indeed, there's 4 round tables exploring holistic themes, the first of which I believe is entitled Who's Responsible? So again, having those different perspectives, there is no right answer, but we're looking for that tension, we're looking for that discourse from you as well. So thank you again. Please enjoy the inspiration, apply the learning, and engage us with what you need to know to make this series even better. And please tell us how this has helped you create impact in sustainability through better design. And so I'd leave with this comment, which a mentor of mine once told me when we were in the midst of a very complex, politically charged and uncertain project, of sometimes we simply begin by beginning. So thank you so much, and join us on the Inspiring platform, and I'll put the link in below. Thanks a lot. Take care. Goodbye.